Welcome everybody to the Reef Resilience webinar, Exploring Enforcement Strategies for Marine Protected Areas. So thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Kristen Mays. I'm the Strategic Communications Manager for the Nature Conservancy's Reef Resilience Program, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you through the generous support of NOAA's Coral Reef Conservation Program. And just a few housekeeping items before we begin. Today's webinar will be 45 minutes, so we'll have a 25-minute presentation followed by a question and answer session. There are two ways participants can ask questions. So you can use the question box at any time throughout the webinar to send questions, and we'll keep track of these for the end of the presentation. Or you can raise your hand during the question portion of the webinar, and I'll take your question during that time. So to raise your hand, you just click on that small hand icon on the toolbar on the left of your name. If you're having any technical difficulties, such as trouble hearing or seeing the slides, you can send us a message via the chat box, and we'll try and resolve the issue. Before I introduce our presenter, we'd like to poll you webinar participants on 3 questions. The first question is, what is the focus region of your work? And we'll give you a minute to respond to this question, and then we'll tally your responses. Okay, we should see the results shortly. Oh, there it is on the screen, and it looks like the participants are pretty much split between Pacific Islands and Caribbean, with some participants from North America as well. It's helpful to know. And the next question is, what is the size of the marine protected area or areas you work in? And the choices are small, 0 to 2,000 square kilometers, medium, 2,001 to 50,000 square kilometers, or large, an area greater than 50,000 square kilometers, and of course the option, I do not work in an MPA. And results for this, looks like the vast majority works in small MPAs under 2,000 square kilometers, with 30% of participants who do not work directly in an MPA. And there'll be one last question that will be helpful to our presenters in our question-answer session, which is, please complete the statement. The main duties of my job fall in the category or categories of, and your choices are administration, resource management, law and or policy, enforcement, or other. And okay, so over 70% of the participants are in resource management positions, and the next category is other, and then a 3-way tie between administration, law and policy, and enforcement. Really helpful to know. So thanks everyone for participating in the poll. I'd now like to introduce and welcome our presenter, Marcel Bigue. Marcel currently leads WildAid's marine program out of San Francisco, having worked in varying capacities both domestically and internationally for the past 15 years. He is seasoned in the design and management of complex humanitarian, development, and marine conservation programs. Marcel first joined WildAid in 2004, where he directed the organization's awareness campaigns in Ecuador, carried out investigative research on the shark fin trade, and supported control and vigilance efforts within the Marine Reserve. He is currently focused on expanding WildAid's marine enforcement programming to new countries and establishing comprehensive marine enforcement plans that incorporate technology to lower operational costs while increasing system efficacy. Thanks for taking the time to present today, Marcel, and I'll now pass it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Kristen, and good afternoon to everyone. I first want to begin by thanking TNC and the Reef Resilience Program for this opportunity. So as mentioned, I've been involved in MPA enforcement now for over 11 years, and I'm pleased to see the growing interest in the subject matter. Today I will provide a brief overview of the law enforcement chain, kind of the basics behind the design of integrated surveillance systems, and discuss two case studies, Palau and Galapagos, and kind of our strategy for each of those contexts. So that'll actually fit well with our group as well, given the fact there are small and medium MPAs in representation. So as many know, MPAs will not succeed without effective law enforcement and compliance efforts. We as an organization specifically focus on the law enforcement chain. That encompasses the activities of detection. We say interdiction, which is basically interception of someone carrying out something illegal, prosecution, and the finding of lawbreakers. Generally speaking, an effective law enforcement system should dissuade a potential lawbreaker from committing something illegal, given the fact that the consequences or the risks associated with apprehension outweigh whatever the economic gain might be. The law enforcement chain requires that each link function in an effective manner, and really there is no one link that is more important than the other. Also critical, yet not part of the enforcement chain, is the vital role that outreach and education of stakeholders plays in MPA acceptance and compliance. So in our experience, enforcement isn't just about boats on the water or the installation of hardware such as a radar. We need to take a comprehensive approach. We've identified 5 key components. Surveillance interdiction. One must first identify the most cost-effective suite of sensors for detection in a given area and respond. Obviously, the response depends on institutional or community capacity, for example, available vessels, fuel, number of personnel, what kind of protocols they have, also, what institutions are involved. Systematic training, the regulations, the systems, and the tools are only as useful as those who are trained to operate and maintain them. Prosecution and sanction. It is not worth investing millions of dollars in surveillance systems if there are no repercussions. Administrative or criminal sanctions are necessary to ensure compliance. Education and outreach. This is critical to foster community buy-in as well as to enforce stakeholders of rules and regulations. And finally, finance. Every system has a price tag. We need to look for creative ways to fund enforcement and also reduce operating costs over the long term. Given time constraints today, I'm going to primarily focus on surveillance and interdiction strategies in this talk. Typically, there are 2 types of systems that are used for surveillance, being collaborative and non-collaborative. So collaborative monitoring systems require location transceivers placed on board vessels, and they require that that location device be active. There must be a law that mandates the use of the transceivers and that also dictates penalties for deactivation. And key in this process, in collaborative systems, is the fishers must be part of it. There are basically 2 types of collaborative technologies that are currently being used, VMS, which is vessel monitoring systems, and AIS, which is automatic identification systems. Historically, the primary difference between these 2 types of systems is that VMS uses satellite frequencies to collect data, whereas AIS uses radio frequencies. Ultimately, this information is sent to shore-based stations or a vessel traffic center, to monitor the movement of vessels. Non-collaborative systems, on the other hand, do not require transceivers nor the participation of fishers in the process. These monitoring systems detect vessels in a specific geographic area. The types of sensors include visual, radar, optical, and/or infrared cameras. These sensors are either located at strategic sites on the coastline, or they can be mounted upon, mobile platforms, in which a lot of people talk about drones today, or they could just be, mounted on patrol vessels. And then finally, the monitoring of radio communication is also another means for, identifying suspicious activities. So when designing a surveillance system, there are really a number of factors that must be taken into consideration. And I'm going to go through these right now. 1 being the size of the area and detection distances. 2, types of materials used for vessels. We're talking wood, fiberglass, or aluminum. These are all critical in determining a particular surveillance technology. 3, numbers of vessels. Are we talking about tens or thousands of vessels? 4, numbers of agencies that might benefit from the technology. And also important, can they share the costs for purchasing and the maintenance of these different technologies? 5, use patterns. For example, are we more concerned with illegal fishing? Is it more predominant at night? 6, existence of fisher registries for compliance purposes. 7, coastline characteristics. Are there a lot of coves, outcroppings, or is the area free from obstruction? 8, level of professional development of staff to operate and maintain the systems. And then 9, annual budgets in terms of capital expenditures, their CapEx, or their operating expenditures, or OpEx, will be very critical in determining what really is feasible over time. So the following illustration summarizes our kind of general rule of thumb for the types of sensors we would use for particular coverage ranges. So 0 to 10 nautical miles, the optical equipment such as binoculars and high-power video cameras. 0 to 30 nautical miles, radars. 0 to 100, AIS with shore stations, and then beyond that, either VMS or satellite AIS. It's important to note that there is no one silver bullet sensor that can provide full coverage, and so when we design these systems, we take this into consideration, and so we tend to design complementary systems, or essentially where there are systems that there's an overlap of different sensors. For example, radars or high-power cameras can often be placed near very productive coastal fishing grounds, and they can identify vessels that may have AIS or VMS but have actually deactivated. So it again is another example of how a system can be layered and complement each other. So collaborative systems have pros and cons. With respect to the pros, AIS provides real-time monitoring of small and fast vessels. VMS provides location information over vast areas in open ocean. The capital and operating costs of both systems are relatively inexpensive, and both systems are being deployed in the developing world. And it's interesting that hardware and service prices are coming down almost on an annual basis, so it may make their widespread adoption more feasible in the long run. With respect to the cons, VMS provides location information every 1 to 6 hours, which really isn't appropriate for artisanal vessels. In addition, one has to purchase a transceiver, which runs more or less $1,000, and there's a monthly cost associated with the service, which is about $50, and that is normally picked up by the fisher or the boat captain. AIS requires the purchase of a transceiver also, which tends to cost around $1,000, but we're using shore-based stations. There are no recurring costs. This makes AIS more feasible for nearshore context. Collaborative systems require law to 1, mandate their use, and to 2, provide incentives for adoption, as all fishers do not like to be monitored. For example, in Ecuador, we link the use of transceivers to access essentially a fuel subsidy. Transceivers can be deactivated, and there must be stiff penalties. For example, in Mexico, there's a law that requires the installation of VMS transceivers on commercial vessels, but the legislation makes no mention of what happens when they're actually deactivated. So it's clearly a flaw in the legislation. With respect to non-collaborative systems, radars are ideal for the detection of medium to large vessels up to 30 nautical miles. They're not really effective beyond that. Also, it's important to take into consideration that radars do not perform well beyond 6 nautical miles in the detection of small wooden or fiberglass vessels. Sophisticated radars can improve performance, but oftentimes at an unreasonable cost-effectiveness ratio. Optical video and infrared cameras are ideal for detection of vessels up to 10 to 12 nautical miles. They are largely ineffective beyond that range because of visual horizon, so they can, again, be mounted on drones for an additional 10 to 30 nautical miles of coverage. Again, radio monitoring is a cheap alternative to detect suspicious activities. However, this requires dedicated and trained personnel. And finally, visual observation by officers and stakeholders proved to be the least expensive and appropriate for community enforcement systems. although they tend to be limited to 8 nautical miles. But this is very effective for nearshore contexts. So I want to now explain the logic behind the design and enforcement system we recently completed in Palau in cooperation with the Nature Conservancy. We carried out this assessment in May 2014 and are now aiming to implement the first phase of the plan in 2015. But first, I want to give a little bit of context. So the state of Triangle is responsible for monitoring 2 no-take zones and essentially covering a maritime area of 2,000 square kilometers, which is relatively small. It does this with 7 staff, 2 vessels, and an annual budget of roughly $100,000. The primary threats are out-of-state fishers who use 7-meter fast boats to target no-take zones and spawning aggregation areas. In Palau, there is no legislation that mandates the use of transceivers for smaller vessels, so we designed a simple, non-collaborative surveillance system within these constraints. It is also important to note that this is a newly created agency, and as such, it is vital to create basic operating protocols for personnel, as well as provide basic maritime safety and vigilance courses. These activities are planned for 2015. As one of our first steps, we donated VHF marine radios to improve communication between the patrol vessel crew and the control center. At the end of the day, communication really is the backbone of any enforcement system. So as 70% of enforcement expenses are typically related to personnel and fuel, we always aim to lower these costs. In the cost of Triangle, we can't limit personnel expenses as they're already operating with the minimum number of staff. In fact, they could use a couple more. We did, however, design a system that saves fuel by combining the use of a high-power video camera to provide coverage of key access ways and protected areas. You can see the camera coverage is represented by the large orange circle, with a strategic placement of buoys for the mooring of a patrol vessel. So, instead of carrying out constant patrols, the vessel remains in close radio communication with the control center officer to respond only when a vessel enters the area. As illustrated in the slide, the placement of a high-power video camera at Triangle will provide coverage of Marcel Reef to the south and Narangal to the north, and allow for coordination with the patrol vessel moored at Narangal. As a second phase, we suggested the addition of a floating barge to provide a constant presence in Narangal. This is an area known for high incidence of illegal fishing. The barge would be used on a seasonal basis, staffed by 3 for 2-week intervals, and also be equipped with a small radar, thus increasing sensor coverage by an additional 6.5 nautical miles. So implementation of the camera and the workstation at the control center would cost about $36,000. The buoys, $12,000, both of which fit within their operating budget. The floating barge would cost an additional $70,000 for refit and would require additional personnel. I would like to now shift gears and discuss the Galapagos, which is a very different concept. In comparison with Palau, the Park Service is responsible for managing the marine reserve, which is 130,000 square kilometers. To do this, the park possesses a fleet of 17 vessels, 60 marine park wardens, and an operating budget of $2 million. The threats are multiple, as they have national and international commercial fishers who encroach upon the reserve, as well as a local fleet composed of 450 vessels, which has exclusive fishing rights within the reserve. We've worked in the Galapagos now for over 12 years and have seen our support for the park evolve over that time as well. At first, we helped the park acquire patrol vessels and equipment, as it had none prior to 1998, the year in which they created the reserve. So by 2005, the park had acquired so many assets, most were not operational, as the maintenance capacity didn't keep pace with the acquisition spree. So then we then refocused efforts on establishing maintenance capacity and looked to technology to lower patrolling costs while increasing detection effectiveness. So with respect to VMS, we drafted regulations and lobbied the government for 3 years beginning in 2006 to mandate the use of transceivers on all vessels weighing greater than 20 gross tons. Our target was a national commercial tuna fleet, and, well, after 3 years, the system went online in 2009. So, and then once we took care of the tuna fleet, we then focused on the artisanal vessels. And to do this, we installed high-powered video cameras and radars to control the key entry and departure ports on 3 of the islands. Besides providing surveillance sensors, we helped establish maintenance systems to ensure vessel readiness and systematic training for conservation officers in the use of all the different assets at their disposition. This we have done through maritime vigilance training and the crafting of standard operating protocols for the control center, patrol vessels, and also for the boarding teams. And then finally, we hired lawyers to ensure that violators were at least processed via civil sanction, which include monetary fines, confiscation of fishing gear and catch, forfeiture of vessels, and then the long-term vessel detainment. So here we see a snapshot of the reserve as viewed in the control center of the Park Service. The outer red line is the boundary of the Marine Reserve. The red boats are tourism operators, and green boats are commercial fishers. So prior to VMS, it was very hard to monitor the entry of the commercial boats. The park would carry out 7 to 10-day patrols, which are extremely costly to either the north or the south, with limited results. This, however, changed, and really is best illustrated by this 30-day time-lapse snapshot. Here it's clear that the commercial vessels respect the outer boundary of the Marine Reserve, as they are essentially afraid to enter. There have been many cases where boats have been fined and even confiscated. Also, as mentioned earlier, they do not deactivate their transceivers, as repeat deactivation means that they will lose access to subsidized state fuel. Things have changed, though, and now the commercial vessels tow small artisanal vessels behind them that enter into the reserve undetected to fish with small 200-line long lines. So normally, if a large vessel sits outside the reserve for an extended period of time, a patrol vessel or a plane can be sent to visually inspect, whether there are other small boats around. So essentially, what we have is an evolving game of cat and mouse, which requires us to constantly rethink our strategy. In closing, I would like to briefly highlight some lessons learned and then take some questions. First off, political will is one of the most important factors for enforcing regulations and MPA management. One can invest millions in equipment, training, etc., but without political will, there will be limited compliance. 2, without appropriate legislation, collaborative system technology is largely ineffective for vessel monitoring. There must be penalties and incentives for adoption. AIS shore-based station infrastructure was donated in the Galapagos archipelago in 2012. However, it's been largely ineffective, as there's been no legislation obligating the use of AIS transceivers on vessels. 3, all asset acquisitions must be performance-driven and not dictated by donors. The Park Service has received patrol vessels and other assets from donors who had the best of intentions. However, their maintenance proved too costly and resulted in a drain on their operating budget. Many of those boats are now sitting onshore. 4, technology is only a tool. One must invest in institutional capacity and human resources to operate and maintain the systems and ultimately enforce rules and regulations. 5, given high staff turnover, the elaboration of standard operating protocols for key maritime vigilant processes is key in ensuring continuity and preventing informal interpretations of rules and regulations. 6, the elaboration of simple measures such as vessel logs, checklists, and job aids help ensure predictive maintenance versus costly corrective repairs. And last but not least, a physical presence of an authority. Boats in the water still remains one of the best deterrents. And I can now take questions.
Great, thanks Marcel. That was very interesting and informative. So yeah, we'd now like to open it up to question and answer portion of the webinar. And remember that you can either send me your question or raise your hand and I'll call on you. And a couple questions have already come in. So the first question is about the results of the case study in Palau. And this participant asked, how successful has this been? How has the system been working so far compared to what the intention was?
Good question. seeing essentially that we are just now beginning to implement it. Again, I have mentioned in the presentation that we designed the system last year, and now we're working on implementing it. So up till, let's say, today, you know, we've only been able to procure the VHF marine radios. So it's too early. I would say this is something that's ongoing, and we're working with TNC to actually carry out. And we're going to at least need another year, you know, during this year to install the high-power video cameras and the mooring buoys. And you know, there's still a lot that needs to be done with respect to equipment acquisition, as well as just training of the rangers and establishing the standard operating protocols, you know, for the group. So it's very much it's a process. It takes time. We carried out the assessment in last year, June or May of last year, and now it's a matter of implementing it over the next couple of years.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marcel. Another question is wondering if you could talk a little bit about sustainable financing mechanisms or case studies that include sustainable financing. Good question.
Of course, that's a very good question. You know, I think throughout the world, one of the biggest challenges is definitely finding the funds to underwrite enforcement activities. I have been to I don't know 40, 50 different protected areas, and then have found few where they've been self-sufficient in being able to underwrite their activities based on, for example, entrance fees, and that always seems to be the most common one that comes to mind. I think countries such as Palau, I think the case of also Galapagos and Ecuador, there are substantial entry fees for tourists who visit that create a significant pool of resources and helps underwrite the majority of those costs. So when I looked at Palau, and you have the PAN fund, which is quite innovative. I think that's something that should and can be replicated throughout much of the Western Pacific. With respect to the Eastern Pacific, again, the Galapagos as well has served as an example of how a park can be relatively self-sufficient based on having entry fees. Now, we don't work so much on finance per se. I think that's definitely not our expertise, but we do look for ways to identify systems that will lower your operating costs. So a lot of that will be approaching a situation, seeing what the operating budget is, seeing what existing infrastructure exists, and finding ways to look for those kind of easy wins where a one-off capital investment can have a big impact in terms of effectiveness and being able to identify folks or illegal fishers entering a protected area. And then also looking, to ways that you can reduce by, for example, the mooring buoys, and ensuring that, that there are protocols for officers to not constantly patrol, and that they can actually just be stationed and just idle till actually something, takes place. And a lot of these, a lot of the examples that I've used here are things that have worked elsewhere. And that we've actually implemented elsewhere. And but again, funding remains one of those big questions that unfortunately I don't have the easy answer for that.
Thanks, Marcel. The next question is, I agree about the importance of political will to underpin enforcement. Do you have any tips on how to build this for enhanced support to MPA enforcement?
Can you? I didn't catch the last part of that question.
Yeah,
that, please?
For tips on how to build political will to support MPA enforcement. I think.
Okay. What we've historically done is really focused on education and outreach, And I think that that could be as easy as, just doing outreach to local schools. It could be to, enforcement officers and communication departments, doing campaigns and just spreading the awareness of what the benefits are to these, specific areas, what are the consequences. What we've done, for example, speak to our experience in Ecuador, for example. We worked with the Ecuadorian soccer team that went to the World Cup, and we did like a series of public service announcements and got them on the radios and did concerts, and this was all essentially, to support a law that prohibited the export of shark fin, from the country, and then also was linked, to efforts in the Galapagos as well. I think there's, a number of different ways that you can just get greater awareness out there via, be it social media or traditional marketing means in that respect. And also, just looking for ways to really engage and inform, different, whether it be park directors or ministers of things that are taking place. And always, as NGOs, we have no authority in most of these countries. So if we can make them look good, it will also, create additional, I think, buy-in to and support for, our projects.
Great, thanks, Marcel. That's helpful. Next question is a question about monitoring. Asking what indicators do you monitor, or would you recommend monitoring for evaluating the success of an enforcement system?
Can you, for some reason, I'm not getting your question, so can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. This is asking about indicators to monitor, or looking at to measure success, and the question is, what indicators do you monitor, or would you recommend monitoring for evaluating the success of an enforcement system? Did you get it?
That's a great question. Yeah, no, I did get it. So KPIs, your key performance indicators. We tend to, you have your operational indicators, your process indicators, and kind of your impact indicators. And a lot of what we look to, obviously one is kind of compliance in terms of captures, in terms of sightings. If someone's been cited and that they've been detained, that's one. But more often than not, as everyone knows, it's very hard to actually apprehend someone once they've been identified because they tend to, just flee. So another one is just sightings, but with no interdiction, because as I mentioned earlier, just a physical presence says a lot, and more often than not, when there is a physical presence of an authority, most won't enter a reserve to carry out illegal fishing. And then we look at others that are kind of just more operational in terms of, nautical miles patrolled is another one. So those are a few that I can share with you in terms of what we use. And then we are always monitoring also kind of, our budget execution as well as to numbers of patrols and number of infractions just to see kind of the cost benefit and look for ways to reduce that.
Thank you, Marcel. And the next question, try and speak clearly, can you make a brief cost and effectiveness comparison between patrol vessels and drones beyond flight autonomy distance considerations?
Good question. Well, to be honest, we have not worked with drones all that much as of yet, given the fact that they still do remain quite costly. We were working with Aero Environment, which is a manufacturer of the Puma, which is one of the cheaper units that are being used in drone maritime surveillance. But even operating 3 of those, just the actual capital cost of buying one of those, or a set of three, is $300,000. So we haven't, because a lot of the areas that we work in are quite resource poor, and we don't really feel that the costs of drones have come down enough for us to actually look at them as being a viable tool for those environments. And it gets much more complicated if you start talking beyond 2 hours autonomy for drones, because then once you go from electric to gasoline, the cost just explodes. It can go from a few $100,000 to something like the Skin Eagle, which is, you're talking $1 million, and then just the maintenance of these of drones becomes also another issue, etc. So unfortunately, it's not something that we have spent all that much time on. As of, we haven't, I would say, piloted drones. Because at the end of the day, what we try to do is ensure a minimum response capacity, and more often than not, many places do not even have that. So, and that requires having, boats in the water, wardens trained according to protocols, knowing how to, essentially approach and board a vessel, carry out a crime scene investigation, and then create a court case, or or carry out administrative sanctions. And I think drones can be helpful in identifying some suspicious or illegal activity. However, for that information to be useful, it still needs to be, more often than not, if there's going to be a consequence for that, there needs to be actual physical interdiction of an authority. So, not to say that they're not useful. I believe they are, but I just don't think they're the most appropriate yet, given their cost for a lot of the context, whether it be small to large MPAs.
And Marcel, while we're talking about the cost of tools, another participant asked where he can get detailed information on high-powered surveillance cameras. Maybe can you talk a little bit about surveillance?
We've been actually working with a company called Kohu. They're based out of San Diego. They seem to, we've looked throughout the market, and that seems to be the best equipment manufacturer that we've found to date in terms of pricing and quality of product. And I'd be more than happy to share that information. I don't know how we can arrange like contact information, but I could definitely send on some information about the manufacturer.
Great. And as soon as the question and answers wrap up, I'll talk about a way that we can share information afterwards too. So perhaps you can post the first link there. There are two last questions that I'm hoping we can get to. Another participant asks, do you think that volunteers can help us in the surveillance of marine protected areas? So the question's about the role of volunteers in MPAs.
I definitely believe that they can help, just such as tourism operators, so can volunteers. However, they need to be really, plugged into a fine-tuned enforcement unit to begin with. I think, volunteer could be a great sensor. However, their participation, what their roles and responsibilities needs to be, extremely clear, because a volunteer can quickly, turn from being an asset to a liability. And again, it comes down to jurisdictions and competencies in the legal frameworks. And I think, I think if they're just going to be, tipping someone off, that's one thing. However, I think it's always important to also look to see, whether that's actually frowned upon or whether it's allowed within the legal framework. But I would say yes, but it has to be they need to be carefully inserted into a control and vigilance plan.
Okay. Marcel, there's a follow-up question to the earlier question about the Palau case study. And if it's too early to tell anything about the results, can you talk a little bit about how the project is being perceived by the fishing community? So have there been any reactions so far? Has word gotten out? Any anecdotal evidence of behavior change?
From I have not been back to Palau since, so it's been about eight months since I've been back to Palau. However, I've kept in contact with our TNC colleagues in Palau, and everyone is quite excited to actually get the enforcement system up and running. And the reason as well as why things have kind of move slowly is because, one, politics. There have been essentially municipal elections, and then two, TNC has been working, in that specific Northern Reefs area for more than 10 years now, and they were essentially working with the fishermen of essentially two states, Kyangle and Marlon, to agree to new fishing regulations, which I understand have is something very new for a number of key species that have that are now in decline. So, and that process has been participatory and carried out with the fishermen, and they're very much on board of first agreeing to what the what the new fisheries regulations are, and then they're very clear that that's going to require enforcement, and that is going to come online once once the regulations are hammered out, and that's pretty much going to be done at the end of this quarter. So that work was very important to set the framework, and then now the enforcement will follow. But yes, people are very aware. The fishers are aware of what is taking place, and also excited as well, because their resources are extremely degraded, compared to historical standards.
Great, thanks, Marcel. Mm-hmm. And the last question is, given resource constraints, what activities would you prioritize?
Well, I would first and foremost, put together a control and vigilance plan. Have a very concrete plan to work from. Often overlooked, I think you have to start with the house first. So I would say human resources, in terms of creating, professional capacity of your rangers or your officers, and focus on, getting them trained and creating, very standard operating protocols. Now, when I speak to operating protocols, I'm not talking about, books of how to do things. It's really simple procedures, that everyone is very much aware of how and what they're supposed to do a specific activity. I would also focus on ensuring that there are clear interinstitutional arrangements. In most countries, there's always 2 or 3 authorities that are involved in whether it be fisheries or environmental enforcement. So, and there's typically lack of resources. So, clear interinstitutional agreements and the sharing of resources will improve success, for rules actually and regulations being carried out. And then I would also really look to establishing kind of minimum surveillance and detection capacity. So based on whatever limited budget there is, ensure that there is at least binoculars and the very basics in I guess visual and optical hardware to carry out surveillance, and then also having boats that are adequate for that specific area. And I always tend to say that officials need smaller motors for a lot of what they're going to be doing in terms of patrols versus larger motors, and over time that will save thousands and thousands of dollars for that particular park authority.
Wonderful, thanks, Marcel. That's some really helpful guidance. And I'm sorry to wrap up the question and answer session, but our 45 minutes are up. We encourage you to continue the conversation on the Reef Resilience Network discussion forum. We're going to put a slide. Yep. So this is an interactive online community of coral reef managers and practitioners from around the world. You can go to reefresilience.org, so the Reef Resilience Toolkit, and click on the network tab to log in or join the network forum. And here you can join or start conversations, share resources, and connect with other members. So Marcel, this is where I was suggesting that you can share information on the surveillance resources. And for participants of the webinar, if you'd like to continue the conversation, this is could be a really useful platform for doing so. So thank you to everyone for joining us, and thank you, Marcel. The recording of this webinar will be sent to the Reef Resilience Network email list tomorrow. If you're not on the list and would like to be, please email us at resilience@tnc.org. Also, please send any suggestions for future webinar topics to the same email. Thanks again for your participation, and thanks, Marcel.
All right, thank you all.